This is Mrs. O'Brien in the middle school, and I've been asked to share my experience when I found out about the attacks on 9/11. At the time, I was a stay at home mom. I had two young children at home, and what I remember about the day was what a beautiful fall morning it was. I had taken my children to the park that morning. It was a beautiful fall sunny day, clear blue sky, puffy clouds, just like the picture perfect kind of day. And I remember as I was walking home thinking, wow, this is just a perfect day. It was going to be my son's first day of preschool. He was 3 years old at the time. So we went home, I got my kids a snack, and I noticed that the indicator on our answering machine was going nuts. This was before voicemail and everybody texting. So I hit the play button, and there were all these messages from like my husband, friends, family members saying, "Carolyn, you got to turn on the news. Something's going on." And my friends and family know that I don't watch a lot of TV, so that's why they had called. So I had the kids situated with a snack. I walked down the hall to my bedroom and turned on the TV. And I'll never forget, as I turned it on, I saw, just in time to see one of the planes hitting the towers. And I remember thinking, well, that's why would that happen? Is the pilot really inexperienced? What's going on? But the more I watched, the more real it became. A second plane hit the second tower. The reporter was talking about how planes had been grounded, that there was another plane in the air. And I just remember this feeling of utter disbelief. Like, why is this happening? Are we at war? What? I remember trying to call my family. I'm from Baltimore, not far from DC. And each time I called my parents' phone number, I just got a really fast, busy signal. It wasn't for another 30 some hours before I was able to get through to my parents. So worried about them. Just, again, utter disbelief. And what does this mean? I remember walking out of our bedroom to where the kids were sitting on a blanket having their cracker snackers and thinking, what's this going to mean for my kids? And in the following days, my son, who was very observant, when we would go outside, he would say, no planes, Mommy. And I was like, oh my gosh, even my 3-year-old is picking up on the fact that something is really not right here. Like many other people, I was completely overwhelmed with the sacrifices that people made. The people on Flight 96 who took the plane down in Pennsylvania, saving untold numbers of lives, yet sacrificing their own. Firefighters and emergency medical personnel who ran into buildings that were on fire and coming down. The scores of people who were waiting in line for hours at American Red Cross to give blood. That helped give a sense of hope, because it was a very bleak moment. And I just kept thinking about, what does this mean for the future? So thank you for allowing me to share, and have a good day.
September 11th, I was a sophomore in college, just about to start. Ohio State had not started yet, so I was still back home in my bed, sleeping. My mom came in and woke me up, and I could tell she was visually upset. She couldn't say anything. She turned on the TV in my room to the news, and I was kind of groggy and waking up and trying to figure out what was happening. And then as we're watching, the second plane hit. They had a live feed, and we saw that happen. So then she tried kind of filling me in on what was happening. Her family's from Long Island, and so we tried calling all day. We couldn't get a hold of anybody. All the phone lines were down and busy. Later, we found out my grandma's work, they all went to the roof of their work across the way. They could see everything in a distance, and they could see, but they were in a safe-ish place. And then my niece was in grade school, and they just dismissed the schools, and a lot of the kids were in walking distance. And my aunt was trying to find my niece, and she went to the school to try to find her, and they connected. But it took a day and a half before we were able to get anybody on the phone and figure out what was going on. I lived at the time, I lived in Morrill Tower at Ohio State, the two towers next to the stadium on the second to top floor. So we had just experienced this, and a week and a half later, I had to go move back in to the top of the tower. And my sophomore year definitely felt different from my freshman year living there.
September 11th, 2001, I was actually a ninth grader in my very first day of high school. I was in Edison, New Jersey, which is about 30 minutes from New York City. And I remember being in my second period English class when the principal made an announcement that we should keep our thoughts with people in the Twin Towers because a plane had hit. None of us really understood how big the situation was. We were confused. We didn't understand. After third period, our school closed and sent the kids home. And so I got a ride home with a senior. And I remember us putting the radio on to get some information. And all the news reports were all over the place. They were saying that the White House was on fire, that Sears Tower had fallen. So much misinformation. There was just chaos. People were confused, scared, sad. It was a really chaotic day. It was so crazy that there were no planes flying anymore. For days, there were no planes in the sky. And I remember that just being so strange. As we moved forward and went back to school and got into the swing of things, the one thing that I remember is just the unity of our school and how we came together. We did have friends that lost parents in the tragedy. And there was just this feeling of hope within our school that we could come together and we could help each other. We did fundraisers. We rallied around people who had lost loved ones. And so in this really chaotic and sad and tragic time, this, small group of high schoolers in a little school in Edison, New Jersey, came together and really unified and looked to bring positivity to the world. And so it was a crazy time, and it gives me hope to think that in those crazy moments, there can still be groups of people that bring hope and help.
This is my reflection on 9/11. Empty sky. I woke up that morning to an empty sky. I lived in New York City, only I wasn't there that day. I was 2.5 hours away in upstate New York, helping a friend move into his new apartment. The sky out there in the country was as clear and blue as it was down in the city. I woke up that morning hearing the mayor of New York telling people to evacuate. I heard the mayor's announcement through the wall on the neighbor's TV. My friend didn't have a TV, computer, or phone set up yet. His apartment, just a pile of moving boxes. I woke up my friend to tell him what the mayor said. We rushed out to the car to drive back to his parents' house in New Jersey and back to my apartment in the city. Our cell phones did not work. We listened to the news reports on the car radio. Worried about my friends, worried about my roommate who worked across from the World Trade Center, worried about my mom, a flight attendant for American Airlines. Was she on one of those flights? The 2.5-hour drive back turned into an 8-hour test in uncertainty and unknowing. Stuck in traffic, silent, glued to the car radio, trying to picture how the Twin Towers could be on fire. Then, how could they be gone? What do you mean they're gone? Asked my friend. I thought of Windows of the World, a restaurant and ballroom at the top of One World Trade Center with views spanning from Brooklyn to New Jersey. A place where tourists and New Yorkers alike took friends and family to marvel at the views. Was it gone too? What about all the workers that made that place so welcoming? The elevator operators, the hosts, the cooks, the musicians, the staff, were they okay? I woke up from my worries about what I couldn't see. My cell phone reception was back. My mother was okay. Her plane grounded in St. Louis. My roommate was okay. He saw the second plane fly into the South Tower, ran down flights and flights of stairs to the street, and jumped in a cab home. Then it hit me. Seeing the New York skyline from the New Jersey Turnpike, a cloud of smoke taking the place where the Twin Towers once stood. I woke up that morning to an empty sky.
When 9/11 happened, I was a sophomore in high school, and I was actually living on Long Island in New York. And I remember it pretty well. I was sitting on the bleachers during gym class, and we were all getting we had those combination locks, and we were all getting called out to go take our combination locks and put them on the new lockers that we were getting that year. And then all of a sudden, there was an announcement over the loudspeaker that explained what had happened and that planes had crashed into the Twin Towers. And I just remember being kind of confused and not entirely sure of what was going on. And I also knew at the time that my dad was working down the street at Borough of Manhattan Community College. So I was like, wow, it's like really close. I didn't know how bad it was. So they said if anyone had family that was nearby or something and wanted to make a call, to go ahead and do that. And I remember I was like, oh yeah, my dad's close. So I went down to the main office, and I remember there being like a line of kids and everyone was really distraught. You know, you had kids crying and just all sorts of things going on. And I called, and I remember vaguely that basically I was able to find out that everything was okay, but the building had shook. A lot of people were having a hard time getting in contact with parents and stuff because everyone was calling at the same time, and the service, like phone service and whatnot, was pretty bad. But he ended up being fine. I also had an aunt and uncle and cousins who were down the street right across from where my dad was. Everybody ended up being fine, but I just remember being terrified about the potential for it to be awful. From that day forward, metal detectors were put in the front of the school. We would have like bomb drills and stuff like that. I remember, since I'm like an hour from the city, New York City, where my parents are, I remember the skies being a little more cloudy. There was definitely like a awful smell in the air. It wasn't that close, but you could still like feel it in the air and see it. And it was pretty awful. That was the day that, planes and everything changed, and nothing was the same at that point. And that was just kind of what stuck with me, that my life from 10th grade on had changed with the world like that. And I'll never forget it. I definitely had a not close friend, but like a friend or two who had lost a parent in the World Trade Center. In the crash. But it's in being from New York and Long Island, you definitely, it kind of hits close to home when you think about it. And I was at an age where I was at the same age as you guys right now, so I can completely sort of understand what you guys kind of see at this point, and how you're viewing things, because I was viewing them through the same lens. But at the same time, we all, it was a time when we could all kind of bond together and be even stronger, because we were able to understand what had gone on and be there for our friends and family members and things like that. And I remember people always making sure that things were okay at that time. And my teachers being really open and, just kind of making sure that everybody was okay. I remember they were also showing the clips of it on one of those old wheelie TVs that would be on the thing that would wheel into class and stuff and show, and people would stop by different rooms to look and see what was going on, with obviously the internet not the way it was, and just having access to like regular television and stuff. But yeah, it was a weird time, and definitely something that sticks in my head, but also a really important thing that happened, and making sure that everybody was kind of bonding and being there for each other. In New York was a lot different after that. And I think everyone always knows that like New Yorkers are kind of rough around the edges, but when things like that happen, they always seem to be there for each other. So yeah, that's my story.
This is Mrs. Crable from the middle school. I thought I would share my 9/11 experience with you. I was in college at the time. I think I was a sophomore, and I was at school that day. I was on my way to my theater class, and it was kind of off main campus. Like this was the University of Akron. So, there was main campus, and there were some buildings that were scattered further throughout. And so I had to walk quite a few blocks to get to this particular building downtown. And like I always do, I would walk in, I would go to the bookstore and get a snack before class, and then go down to class. So I'm standing in line at the bookstore to buy my snacks, and the overhead radio cut out, and the news came on, and the broadcaster said something about a plane hitting a building. And so, of course, I turn around and say something to the person behind me. The cashier's like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening? Wow, like that's horrible," but we all just thought it was an accident. No one really thought any more about it. I paid for my food and went to class. When I got down to class, people were chatting about it, but again, this is before, people had the internet on their phones. And so we weren't getting information like you would today. We weren't getting this constant barrage of information, or we couldn't look it up and see what was going on that exact minute. So we sat for a few minutes, we chatted, we waited for our professor. He was late. And when he finally got there, 5-10 minutes late, he just had this stricken look on his face, and he was silent. He just walked to the door, and the door was in the back of the room, and he stood in the doorway and looked at all of us and wasn't saying anything. It was like this really strange silence. And he just said, "I think we're going to go home. I think you need to be at home. I think you need to be with your families." And we were still kind of like, "What?" And he said that a second building had hit, or a second plane had hit another building. And so at that point, that's when I kind of realized, and we all in the room kind of realized, that this was more than just a freak accident. And I remember feeling a sense of panic, and I remember feeling a sense of urgency to get out. I mentioned this was in Akron, so we were also the plane that they had known that the other plane was hijacked, the one that flew over Cleveland, Akron, and then landed in Pennsylvania. So I don't know who had that information, or if that was known at that time, but later I remember feeling this really eerie feeling that plane was very near to us, and just really being struck by that too. we went home. I went home. My sister met me at home. We watched the news. We called our parents, and we just really sat there and watched and couldn't believe what was happening. And I remember feeling this total sense of helplessness and vulnerability. And I kept thinking, like, why would someone hate us this much? Why would someone want to do this to our country? I couldn't really wrap my brain around that. And of course, we were wondering, is it going to keep happening? Like, was that just the first of the attacks? Are there more to come? Should we be worried? Where do we go? What do we do? Like, just all of these unknowns was really difficult and very emotional as we were watching the footage of everything happening. I will say, after things settled down and after, I don't want to say after it was over, because I don't really think that an event like that, yes, it's over, but the impact is so lasting. Perhaps what really stuck with me was people coming together after that, the stories of all of the heroes and all of the people who went back in to get more people out. And the phone call transcripts, I'm not sure if you've ever listened to it, but Todd Beamer calling his wife when he was on the plane, and he says, like, let's roll. And that's when they attempted to take over the plane. And they did. They saved, who knows how many lives they saved, but they sacrificed their own, and they knew they were going to do that to save more. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, I don't know what I would have done in that situation, but I remember being so proud of other people and how they came together and how they were so selfless in the face of all the adversity, and literally selfless in the face of an attack. So it's really powerful. I'll never forget it. Thanks for letting me share.
Hello. On September 11th, I was in Newport News, Virginia, working as an engineer for the Newport News shipyard, helping to build the aircraft carriers for our Navy. And actually, a couple of months prior to that, I was actually scheduled to be back in New York City on September 11th. I had completed 1 year of grad school, and after I came home for the summer, things had changed in my life, and I decided not to return back to school, even though I love New York City. It's my favorite place in the world. At the time, it just made more sense just to stay home. So I withdrew from school. And if I hadn't have, I probably would have been in the city that day. And I remember going down to the towers a lot while I was there for that year prior to. There was Krispy Kreme in one of the towers, so I went there a lot to get donuts. I went there to catch the path a lot. I have a cousin who lived in New Jersey at the time, and she was pregnant, so I would travel to go see her often and catching the path. I mean, I can still remember what it looks like going down that escalator, going to the path, walking up to the World Trade Center, being in awe of its height and its beauty, and going to get my Krispy Kreme donuts. So the day that the towers fell was a very sad day for me. It was very hard. I just felt this tremendous sense of loss. I just couldn't believe it. And so when I finished work that day, I left and went straight to my grandmother's house because she was one of my sources of comfort. And I just remember going into her house and laying on her bed and crying myself to sleep, hoping that it was just a bad dream that I would wake up from. And it wasn't. But I also remember how people just came together afterwards and helped each other out so much. It was just so much love. And so it was just a great reminder also that, love comes from the inside. It's who we are. And because of that, because it comes from the inside, nothing on the outside can take that away or damage it in any way. So those are my words of encouragement and my remembrance, my reflection of September 11th.
When I first found out about September 11th, I was teaching third grade in Chicago, and I was in my classroom prior to the school day starting. I did not have the radio on, and Chicago being an hour earlier than Eastern time, the events were unfolding while I was preparing for the day. So I never will forget this, but the very first student that came to the door that morning, his name was Lewis. I still remember his last name as well, but I won't share that. But Lewis came to my room right away and said, "Mr. O, did you hear about the airplane that ran into the building in New York?" And I didn't at that point, and not fully understanding what Lewis was telling me, I just thought that he had heard a news story of something inconsequential. So the school day sort of went on as expected. We weren't really interrupted for a while until later in the morning when I had my first break. I went downstairs and walked into the copy room teacher area, and the TV was in there, and I saw the news of what was going on. When my students returned to the classroom, I was back in the classroom with this newfound knowledge and was aware that one of my students, Louisa, again, I know her last name too. It's been a long time, but I can still picture her. Louisa had a family situation in which her father lived in New York and worked in the trade towers, and I knew about that. And so there was some nervous time for me, for sure, not understanding what was going on and not being told by the headmaster at that point that it was not for me to break the story to Louisa. About 20 minutes later, Louisa's mom, who lived in Chicago, came to the classroom to get her, and she was very tearful and emotional at that moment. And so the students started asking questions about what was going on. And we did our best to downplay the situation teaching third grade. We didn't dive into the specifics of what were happening. And as I said, we didn't have TVs in the classroom, it being 2001. So a lot of the details were eluding me. However, when on my trip home to my house in Evanston that day, I did notice I was in the flight pattern of planes landing at O'Hare, and it was the first time I ever remember it being as quiet as it was on our drive home. It was a beautiful day in Chicago, just like it was a beautiful day in New York that day. And for the rest of the evening, and it seemed like for the next 2 weeks, I was glued to the TV, watching the coverage and feeling very unsettled about how the world had changed. Happy to say that Louisa's father got out and they were reunited, and I will never forget her, and I will never forget Louis for telling me about what had happened that day. But it was undoubtedly a day that impacted me in many ways, I think, for many years thereafter.
I was living in Atlanta on September 11th, and my job at the time was the leader of a senior center. I had 35 primarily African-American women between the ages of 50 and 92. And my husband at the time, Eleanor's dad, had been working remotely in Atlanta for a company whose office was on Church Street, right behind the World Trade Center. In fact, we had just been there a few weeks before, or the week before, and taken some incredible pictures of the towers. I was watching the Today Show like a billion other people, and saw the second plane hit live on television. And it was one of those moments where your brain tries to tell you a story of what could actually be happening, because it's too big, it's too massive, it's too much to believe that what you actually saw was real. Eleanor's dad was in the shower. I went into the bathroom and said, "Something's terribly wrong with air traffic control, but I think you should call your office." And he jumped out of the shower and didn't really understand what was happening, but he called and they were already evacuating his office building. In fact, that day, several people walked across the Brooklyn Bridge carrying equipment from the office, servers, with client data. Christopher, my husband at the time, actually waited all the rest of the week to hear from our friends in New York that they were okay, because you couldn't get a line out to call to New York. But I had to go open my senior center because the women at the center still needed to come and get their hot meal, and they still needed me to be there for community. So I arrived at the center and unlocked the door as the bus was getting there, and I was rolling the TV out to tell them what was happening, and I was so upset and scared. And these women, they turned off the television and said, "We can't do anything about this right now, so we are going to pray, we're going to sing a song, and we're going to get on with our day, Michelle." And I got very angry, and I said, this is important. Like, something really scary is happening. And 3 of the women pulled me to the side and held my hands and very calmly said, "Little girl, we have been through so much." Several of them had actually marched with Dr. King in Selma. They had been a part of all kinds of incredible events, terrifying and inspiring in their lives. And they squeezed my hands and said, "We can't change this right now, so we're going to do what we can do, which is sing a song, say a prayer, and live our lives and get on with our day." And it was such a lesson in how to control what you can control, what I say, what I think, and the action I take, what I do. I know I was in the exact right place I needed to be. They held me together that day. Even when our center was later evacuated, we were very, very close to downtown, and they were sending everybody home that was close to a federal building. We were about a half a mile from the federal courthouse. Later that week, we heard from our friends in New York that one of our friends had been at the top of Tower 2, and he had been holding the door so that other people could get down the stairs to get out of the building. I know that Eleanor's dad and I both separately have visited Ground Zero and looked for his name and said a prayer. I remember being really scared and angry right afterwards, which I'm not an angry or scared. I don't live my life that way, but I was very scared and very angry. But I think I was also then surrounded by, again, those women at the center who just kept reminding me every day that leaning into fear or anger was not going to solve anybody's problems, that love was the only way. It was the only way to change things in the world. And I'm so grateful that I was with them, because I think that really started me on a journey of discovery, how to really make change, and that really kindness and compassion and open-mindedness and love are really the only way to make any kind of true and lasting change. Thank you for letting me share. I miss them.
Good morning, everybody. This is Miss Aid in 3rd grade. I'm going to share where I was September 11th, 2001, and the emotions I felt. I was teaching 4th grade in New Hampshire, and a friend had called me while the students were out of the classroom and told me what what was happening, and I remember the feeling of surprise and just shock, and just thinking, how could America be so disliked by others that they would do something like this? and hurt so many people. As the day went on, I heard from other teachers who had family members in New York City, and luckily they were safe. So it was close to home. New Hampshire is not too far away from New York. So we were sharing, a lot of the teachers were sharing their feelings of shock, of just disbelief. And throughout the days after President George Bush addressed America with his message of how we will rise above this and kind of defeat hate with love, as Dr. King reminded us. So hope was, I guess, the motion that I felt in the coming days after, in the coming weeks. And still to this day, I'll read this book called September 12th. We Knew Everything Would Be All Right, written by a first grade class in Massachusetts who lived through September 11th during that year. And in this book, it's a message of hope and knowing and feeling that we will be okay despite the adversity. So thanks for letting me share my thoughts. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you. Have a good day.
When 9/11 occurred, I was living in Pittsburgh with my husband, an FBI agent and bomb tech, and our 3 little girls. My husband was on his way to Cleveland to do some training, and he abruptly received a phone call that indicated he needed to turn back and come back to Pittsburgh immediately. From there, he came home, picked up a small bag and filled it with clothes, and left right away. And he was on his way to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. My husband spent about 3 weeks in Shanksville because of the horrible crash that occurred on that day. If you see images of people wearing hazmat PPE shifting through the rubble by the airplane crash in Shanksville, my husband was one of them. Every year, 9/11 stirs up so much emotion. There was such a tremendous loss for so many. People still grieve greatly for what happened on 9/11, but at the same time, I feel such patriotism and pride to live in the best country in the world.
Hi, my name is Mrs. Cohen. I'm an Explorers teacher, and I have already done this once and started to cry, so I'm going to really try and keep it together for this one. But on September 11th, 2001, I had just landed in London Heathrow Airport. I was heading into my sophomore year of college, and my best friend picked me up at the airport, and we were driving home back to campus, and we got a phone call from our friend Mitchell, and he worked at a department store, and called and was like, "Beth, something's going on with New York. I'm not sure what's happening. It's on the news." I said, "Oh, that's an old story. Don't worry. I just left there. I'm from New York." So I was like, "I just left there. It's totally fine." And he said, "Okay, all right." And he hung up, and he kept driving along, and he called a little while later and said, "Actually, this hasn't left the news. They haven't broke to commercial. Something is happening right now, and you need to turn on the news." And I turned it on and saw my home, the place that I grew up, falling. And it was terrifying, and it was, I felt empty. I wanted to go home. That's all I remember. I just kept saying, "I just want to go home." And so another friend came and picked me up and took me to her house where she had a landline, which is like a house phone. And somehow I got a hold of my dad. I'm not really sure how. He has a phone. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but yeah, he has a phone that's attached to some power. Anyways, I got a hold of my dad, which helped a lot to know he was safe and okay. I was lucky that none of my friends really worked around there at the time. I actually was the one that worked around there. I worked a block and a half away from the World Trade Centers that summer. So that was my stomping ground for the summer. I had lunch in the courtyards. I remember, to me, it's my old New York of the memories before September 11th. I went to high school in Manhattan, and so I would take the subway, and I would go over ground 2 stops, and so you could see the skyline. And for some reason, I always said hello to the World Trade Centers. I always said good morning. They were kind of like my friends. Strange, but true. They were a magnificent force to be reckoned with, and I knew I wanted them on my side. And so I had my prom in the bottom of the World Trade Center in one of the hotels. So yeah, it was definitely a part of my life that I was watching fall to pieces, and I couldn't be there. We had debris in our backyard. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, so it's not Manhattan, but it's close enough that we were able to, the debris flew over to our house. I know one of my friends lives really close by, and she lives on one of the top floors of her apartment building, and she actually heard one of the planes go over her building and was terrified, not knowing why there would be, like, that idea would never even go to her head, but she just said, oh my gosh, that plane was so close. What's going on? And didn't think anything of it. And so, yeah, it was definitely a very close place for me at the time. I was lucky enough I did not lose anybody from my immediate circle, but I definitely have friends who have lost their parents, friends whose dads were firefighters, who went in and never came out. And so my dad flew me home for Thanksgiving. And when I arrived, I had been told that there was soot on the side of the buildings, and it was just a harder place to be, understandably. And so when I got there, that's what I thought I was going to see. And obviously I definitely did. But I also saw the strength and the unity that people had, and the just the coming togetherness. I can't think of the correct word right now, but just the way that we were all rising up together. And that is something that also will always hold true I will hold in my heart. New Yorkers don't disappoint. When there's a job to be done, it gets done. And the healing process was the job. And we all bonded together and helped each other through that time. And the world was right there with us. And you definitely felt like you were just part of a much larger healing process and time to come together. I had friends that were from Australia that were firefighters there, and they said they wanted to get on a plane and fly to New York right after they saw it. So it definitely was a time that everyone was coming together. I will always hold September 11th as a very, very tender part of my heart. I think not only about those that were lost, but I also think about the friends who look at September 11th as the time that they lost their close loved ones. And to them, this is a completely different loss that they felt. And I'm always trying to support them as much as possible. But I also think that when I think back and I'm reflecting now, is that a lot of these feelings are similar to the feelings that I've been feeling for the past few months. And there's parts that are scary and unknown, but there's also a huge sense of unity and coming together and helping each other out and knowing that we too will get through this. And so as you all embark on what you're embarking on right now, just knowing that you have each other and we all have each other, and we can all get through this, just like so many of us got through that very, very dark day. So yes, thank you. Bye.